Hey guys, Dirty H here and welcome back to Europe in Detail. We now have a name for our town and it is Borgovino, which basically means wine town in Italian, and I had the help of a Reddit user to choose that name because the original name I had chosen was a little bit inappropriate by the sounds of it, so this is much like the meaning from the name I chose but in a more appropriate manner, I think. I did read your guys' comments in regards to the name of the town, and I seen someone name it Dirty Town or something there, which made me laugh, and I just couldn't name this Dirty Town for the life of me, but yeah, thank you anyway. So anyway guys, in this episode we expand this town by probably double, so we start with this hill here, so let's get into it. So I decided on Borgovino for the name of the town because I want to base this little town off winemaking and wine tours, wineries, you know, all of this vegetation on the hills could be vineyards for winemaking, or at least some of them could be dedicated towards that. And I think that's a pretty noble thing for the town to be based around and pretty neat, so I can build a few buildings and stuff around this idea as well. So yeah, there's a little background into the name and why I've decided to choose it. So anyway, you see me extend the top of the town here, and the first thing I did was put pedestrian paths up here for access, and I change all of these buildings so there's spawn points off a lower road, or a lot of them, because I do end up running a road up here a little bit later on, but we'll get into that then. But you'll see these paths are following the curves of the terrain here, and then the buildings sort of all follow that, and it's quite important to do this because when we look at Manarola in real life, it does very much follow the contours of the land. And I really love the idea of this little town and how close knit it is, you know, with your neighbours right next door. There's no wasted space. This would be a very social little town where you'd almost know everybody in the town. It's very, very intimate, which is why I believe it's probably really romantic, and the whole wine thing goes well with that too, just quietly. So after I get most of the main buildings in here, I go back with a few and put them in sort of odd areas and try and make it look a little bit more bespoke than just having them all placed perfectly along the paths. And it's really cool to see later on all the pedestrians using these paths to get to their houses, even though the spawn point's down on the road. These are really flooded with heaps of people using them, which looks great. And as we near the top of the hill here, I thought it's time to bring a road up here. These buildings are starting to get too far away from the main road down on the ground, on the flat level ground. But what I've decided to do up here is actually place these buildings over top of the road so you don't see it. And you also won't see any of the vehicles dropping off goods and stuff like that, which is what we want. And after I've placed those buildings over the road, I can just drag that pedestrian path out in front of the buildings like we have been, and doing it this way just sort of ensures that we're not going to have any problems with notifications up here. This road is going to allow, you know, plenty of services and stuff up here, but hopefully the citizens still decide to walk on the paths rather than up the road. So once we're done with all of these buildings here, this is as high as we're going to go, so we can come back and start detailing everything up a little bit closer. The first thing I put in regards to the small details is I found this really cool tarpaulin on the workshop on Steam, and I'm pretty sure this was actually made for City Walk City Walls Mars series, but I've PO'd it here and stretched it out a little bit bigger, and I just use it in a couple of places to just hang randomly over top of the path, and I think it really gives off a cool sort of natural Mediterranean vibe, you know, it's really neat. So I thought that looked so good that I ended up putting about 3 of them in, I think, various sizes and in different areas obviously. And then the next thing I look to put in are these really cool roof terraces that I found on the workshop as well, and these are from Seabud, and they come with all these really cool props on them like seats and planters and little umbrellas and stuff, but if you use procedural objects on them, they also change into these really handy sort of basic rooftops. So I go around and place these in a few areas, and they're really good for hiding little shady areas as well that you may not have got to fit as nicely as you wanted. So the other thing you see me doing up here is I needed some sort of pole to anchor the tarpaulin off, so I've used a electricity pole, and I've used some prop wires to make it look like it's sort of running here and there and into some of these buildings, and I don't do this anywhere else in the town at this stage. It's just this little area here, but it just makes it look a little bit more interesting, I think. When we use Google Earth to view this area in real life, we can see there is a lot going on the roofs of these buildings. And I want to add a few more props and make my town look a little bit more busy on those rooftops. And aside from Seabud's awesome roof terraces that I've placed around the place, I want to create some really individual rooftops. So this particular one here, I'm putting a couple of sort of makeshift markets on. Maybe these ones are a little bit dodgy and hard to find, and one of them's selling some old TVs and the other one's selling some clothes, probably second-hand clothes. But when we view this little market from a distance, like when we're looking down on the town, it really draws your eye. You want to sort of dive in and investigate further, which is exactly the vibe I was going for. So aside from the obvious props that we need for this area, I've also placed in a couple of like really old tin rusted shelters that make the area look really aged. And I also place in a couple of prop doors as well, so it looks like there's access out here via a building. And because all of this area is just for looks, I've also placed a couple of prop people down as well, so it looks like there's life out here. To finish off this area, I want to put some cliffs up against the back of these buildings, so it looks like they were built right up against the cliff, or as far as they could possibly build to. So the idea here is to create sort of a natural edge of the town. So I use the same rocks that I've been using before from Vecchio Cristo and Grey Flame, and I'm trying to follow the curvature of the terrain here. So where I've placed rocks on the other side of this cliff, I've tried to create the same sort of build out, or use the same rocks on this side of the cliff. But in saying that, I also don't want to overdo it. So the idea here is just to accent the original terrain with these rocks and cliffs here and there, rather than covering the entire thing in the rocks. Now we can move on to the second part of our build, and the first thing I've got to do here is adjust this road a little bit. This has sort of got to be in the right spot, pretty well bang on before I can build what I want to build here. What I'm trying to do with the road is just make these bends a little bit sharper. There's a couple of really cool builds that are going to come up in later episodes that require this road to, have slightly sharper turns, so I need to get this right now, even for those future builds to sort of work. So once the road's sort of where I want it, I can spill the terrain as close to the road as I can, because this valley in real life is very, very sharp, and although I'm not following it perfectly like for like, I am taking a lot of inspiration still from the back end of this little town Manarola in real life. The amount of buildings are going to be scaled back as we get further inland with this little town, but the few buildings that will be placed around the place will be a bit more unique than what we've seen so far, and probably a bit more detailed too, would be fair to say. And we actually start with the very first one in this episode, but not till a little bit later on. I want to take care of something that's been bugging me for a long time first. It is time to cover over these horrible surface networks that we had to place in to put the invisible train station in, and what I'm doing here is I'm making it terraced with the cliff surface networks, and then I just find a whole lot of prop bushes and place them over top of it. So in reality they're just sort of hanging in midair, but I needed to do something to get rid of it. I do try and vary this area a little bit from the terraces that we've already got in here by placing very narrow pedestrian paths and using some retaining walls along the edge of them just to create different looking terraces. And once those terraces are laid out where I want them, I spend a long time putting little prop bushes in. And when we look at some of these terraces in real life, some of these gardens are very neat and tidy with very square edges, and they looked well kept. So with this particular part, I'm going to look to do that. I'm going to have nice square edges on these gardens and yeah, make them look like they've been very well looked after and maintained. Actually, maybe these could be some of the vineyards that we were talking about. I picture some crazy local wine connoisseur just very proud of their work, you know, very passionate about what they're doing, and in turn they would have really well kept gardens. So let's go with that theory. Now I can put in the last of the detail to finish off this hillside, and it starts with a few decals, and I'm using the theme decals just with my own grass texture, so it looks like the grass is just sort of running through this area continuously. I also add a few random trees and bushes around the place, so some places looked a bit unkept, and then with the very top or the apex of the hill I turn it into a cliff where it gets really steep, which gives it a really nice natural edge to the hill. There's a really neat part of Manarola that I was definitely going to include in the town in one way or another, and I'm going to include it here. So if we jump on Google Earth and have a look, you can see there's this cool little river that actually follows the contour of the very bottom of the valley, or pretty much right next to the road, and the way that it's shown here is it sort of cuts through and has these retaining walls, and the whole town's been built around this little stream. And the other cool thing that makes this very unique is the town's known for a watermill that's in this part of the town. So I haven't included that in this episode, but I'm definitely going to look to include that watermill at some stage in the future. So my version of this little stream is in a different area of this town than in real life, and I've just used a couple of retaining walls, Lost Gecko's stone one, and put some water in the bottom of this little channel. I've also made it nice and narrow using Terra Networks. Then I look to use some of Kaminogi's really cool waterfall props and PO them so I can lay them flat and make it look like there's sort of little wee fast flowing parts of the stream. I also put a few rock props down in here just to make it look a bit more authentic, and then I use a surface network on the right hand side where it meets the terrain, and once this is done I can look at placing some buildings in. These buildings were close enough to the road on the other side of the river that I didn't have to PO them. I just had to make sure that the terrain didn't spill out and cover over the river, which generally wasn't too much of a problem. But these houses here that are right next to this river in real life have quite a bit of character. They look to have a little bit of land around them. Some of them have terraced it out and made gardens, and others just have it as sort of a general area where they can hang out. But I guess I really wanted to include this area because it's just so different. There's so much character, you know, not one part of this town is the same as any other part, and the same could be said about this little river. It's just very unique. And I've got to say, we are very lucky to have access to the mods and assets that we do, because this is just not possible without them. Yes, I absolutely love the vanilla game, of course, that's why I play it, but when we have access to these mods that can make it so realistic and allow us to build these, crazy little towns like this, then, I'm just like a kid in a candy shop. I just can't help myself. And they also keep the game really fresh. Every time I go in the workshop, there's new assets, and some of them inspire me to make a different type of city or whatever, but for me to be still playing the same game after 6 years, I mean, I'm a gamer at heart, but I've never played the same game for 6 years, so it's a real testament to not only the base game, but also all of the wicked asset and mod creators out there that sacrifice a lot of their time for us to be able to do this. So anyway, the rest of the area here, we put the buildings in following the contours of the paths, which are following the terrain. And I also look to include a little bit of terraced area here where there's some vegetation plots and stuff down, just to give a bit more variation to this part of the town. In real life, there's a couple of little pedestrian bridges that go over the stream, so I'm going to add those in as well, and of course I'm going to connect these up with real paths and up to our existing pathways, and this creates like a really nice bushwalk. It goes through about 100, maybe 200 meters of really thick, dense bush, so this would be a lovely little walk up the hill through here. So in terms of props, I'm using a really narrow, I think it's the 2 meter concrete pedestrian pathway. And then I use some of these are Chinese stone assets, stone stair assets. So I'm using one here with PO to make a little wee sort of curved neat bridge. And there's going to be 2 pedestrian paths that cross over this little stream, and with the other one I keep just the original concrete path there and use an old stone fence prop from Soldine and sort of make it look like an aged stone handrail around this area. And for the surface of the path I use the ploppable asphalt. So it's pretty simple in the end, but it does the job. It doesn't need to stand out like a sore thumb, it just needs to do the job and get pedestrians moving across here and look aged and like it belongs in the town. So the last thing to do to finish off this area is I place a couple of little prop doors in this nearby building and make it look like there's courtyard access directly off this path, and then we just place a few more flowers and little plants and stuff like that around. The last part of our build for this episode is what I touched on earlier. This is one of the more detailed, unique areas that we're going to see from now on as the buildings start to scale off and thin out. And there's actually 2 areas that we're going to put in here, but we start with just another general cafe slash eatery, and we're going to have a few tables and chairs out here and some access through some different unique buildings. And we're also going to look to put in some old stone terraces here as well, like terraced gardens. I've used residential buildings for this little area, so I've had to turn them into PO so that I don't get the citizens sick with the sound of the area and stuff like that. So I've had to use little cube services slipped in here to generate some entertainment, which is a little bit of a go-to trick, to be fair. It's not the first time I've done it in this town. And then we can look to put these really cool terrace gardens in, and I'm using a medieval wall here because it's got quite an old looking stone texture, and I do 2 terraces and then just use a prop grass plana as the surface. And you can see here this is butting in against a path that's running along from the higher part of the town, and eventually this path will come along and down some stairs and into another unique area. So now that we've got all the buildings and the main stuff in place, let's zoom in and detail it up a bit closer. There's lots of these little neat awning covers over the doors in Manarola, so they are the first thing on the agenda. And the next thing I want to do is prop doors in some of these buildings, because some of the walls that are facing out towards the road are blank with not much in them, and it doesn't make sense if they haven't got access off the roadway. So we do that, and also a few decals and stuff like that around the place, because these are very important at making the ground look aged and very well used. And there's a couple of areas in Manarola in real life that are like this, with the road just sort of going straight through a plazaed area. So there's no markings for the road in any of these areas. They're just sort of, you'd have to carefully navigate your way through if you were in a vehicle. So a few tables and some umbrellas is a bit of a go-to for this area, and also you can see the end of our little stream we put in earlier runs up to here. So I put some bollards across there, a few weeds and scrubs around to make it look like it's, you know, the end of a natural looking stream. And I think this area is starting to look really neat. It's definitely unique and nothing like anything else in the town. And after this we can push on to the last little unique build. And what I want to do here is I want to create the first of many boat hires, or like little boat tours, because Manarola has a lot of these in real life where you can hire a boat or go on a tour and it takes you out of the bay and maybe into another little wee port for the day and then back here. So we're going to do, a bit of a boat hire. So this is also going to be where the end of our path runs to. So we're going to bring this down some stairs just in front of the boat hireage building, and this creates a little wee space where we're going to have some of the boats, and some of them are going to be on trailers, some are going to be sort of on blocks being repaired or whatever. And yeah, I thought this was a perfect little area to do this. We have pretty much doubled the size of Borgovino in one episode, and I am very, very happy with that. It's definitely not the quickest building on this type of terrain and stuff, and with these methods, but yeah, it's really satisfying to get a decent part of the city built, and I hope you guys have enjoyed that episode. Please hit the thumbs up if you want to support me, I appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys on the next episode of Europe in Detail. Look after yourselves, guys, take it easy, spread the love around, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.